Davis, member of the Atlanta middle class and the son of one of the leading figures of Black Atlanta, graduate of Harvard Law School, volunteers to defend Herndon at no charge. He, as a young lawyer, hasn't had very much trial experience, but he does his best. And after Herndon is convicted, he appeals it. He's sentenced to 12 years on a Georgia chain gang. And Davis carries on the appeal and finally gets the sentence overturned in the Supreme Court in 1937. By that time, Davis has moved from being a loyal member of the Black middle class, one of the Du Bois's talented 10th, and has instead himself become a communist. He said, "I entered the trial as Herndon's lawyer and ended it as his communist comrade." Davis later becomes editor of the Harlem Liberator, moves to New York, and begins a rise in political prominence that culminates in the 1940s when he's elected to the New York City Council, the first communist to be elected to political office. And of course, there are other intellectuals, Langston Hughes, the poem that was just read was part of his movement to the left. He didn't become a member of the Communist Party, but he worked very closely with the Communist Party during the 1920s. And Richard Wright would be another example of someone who actually becomes a member of the Communist Party, begins to write about race issues in class terms. But at the time of the beginning of the Depression years, for Du Bois, he decides that what the NAACP needs to do is not to abandon its basic reformist orientation, but to begin to emphasize the need to deal with the economic problems by developing a better relationship with unions. And he begins to write editorials such as Marxism and the Negro Problem that are part of his own evolution. He begins to take more seriously the Marxian notions and begins to be drawn to some of them. At the same time, he continues to reject the Communist Party's attitude that only a revolution is going to solve the problems of Black Americans, and it has to be a revolution of Black workers and white workers. Du Bois calls his talented 10th together for this conference at Amenia, New York, at the estate of NAACP board chairman Joel Spingarn. And he draws together some of the most talented figures, the up-and-coming intellectuals in the Black community. People like Ralph Bunche, the political scientist, economist Abram Harris, and Charles Houston, the brilliant lawyer. All of these people were going to make their mark. E. Franklin Frazier in the academic world. E. Franklin Frazier would become the leading sociologist of Black America. Abram Harris, one of the leading economists. Ralph Bunche, the pioneering political scientist. In fact, when I went to UCLA and studied history there, the history department is in the Ralph Bunche building because Ralph Bunche is a graduate of UCLA. Many of these younger intellectuals were also fascinated by Marxism. They distrusted the Communist Party, but they felt that the Communist Party was onto something, that there needed to be a movement that brought the Black working class into the NAACP. As Du Bois himself recognized, the NAACP was primarily a Black middle class organization. Very few of its members were working class. Now, they saw enormous promise, though, in the ongoing effort to unionize industrial workers. The industrial union movement, which culminated in the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO, was a movement that, for Du Bois and many of the other black intellectuals, held great promise because for the first time, white workers recognized the need to draw black workers into the union movement. Before that, the American Federation of Labor, which had been organized around crafts, had opposed bringing black workers and basically saw them as scabs. And actually, many of the AFL unions had anti-black clauses in their constitutions.